when I was the happiest person I knew, I didn't get happy by chance. I didn't get lucky. I got happy by choice. But that's the thing though. I didn't get happy until I realized that it was my choice to make. And that's very important. I think a lot of us don't realize that. And I remember someone once said, when presented to choices, people will always make the best one. But that's the thing. We need to know that we have different choices. And when I realized that I have a choice to be happy, I don't have to get there by chance, which I have been thinking most of my life. That's when everything started to change. So then the question is, how did I realize that I have a choice? And it came when I did my NLP coach training. The very first class. We were sitting there in the audience listening to our teachers, and they asked us, what do you think comes first, a thought or a feeling? And we all responded feeling, right? Because you experience something and then you get this instant feeling. And they just smiled and looked at us for a while, and they said, it's actually the opposite. A thought always comes before a feeling, which means that your feelings are a direct response of the thoughts you've been having. And I started thinking about that. And it actually quite quickly made sense to me. Because if I experience something or notice something, I might not notice my thoughts about it, but I will have an immediate autopilot thought reaction to what I experience. But thoughts are not that easy to notice, but our emotions are very easy to notice if they are strong. And that was the time when I realized that if my happiness, my feelings comes from what I've been thinking about or the way I've been thinking about it, then my thoughts must be the entire golden key to get the emotions that I want. And happiness is an emotion. We often forget that. We often forget that happiness is a feeling. It is not just a result of having our goals achieved or experiencing the things we like. It's a feeling. And I started using this when I realized that my feelings comes from my thoughts. What will then happen if I start to notice my thoughts, and better yet, think on purpose? Because that was the thing. I have never, before that, seen my thoughts or feelings as anything else other than these direct responses to what happens or doesn't happen, to what I have or don't have. You know? And I just, up until that point, I just accepted all of my emotions like they were the only truth. Like they are these programmed responses that happens in everyone when you meet in these situations. And I wouldn't say I was very unhappy all of the time, but I would say I didn't really know what happiness was. And I realized then that I had never used my thoughts on purpose. Because what I used to be was overanalyzing. I used to worry a lot ever since I was a child. I worried about things I did or didn't do in the past. I worried what could happen or not happen during the day. Or I worried about my future. I thought about things that could go wrong. And I thought I was preparing myself for the opposite by worrying about these things, right? But I do now realize why my feelings most of my life were mostly mediocre. They were okay. And I had my ups and downs, as everyone does. But I just accepted whatever came to me because I didn't realize I could choose different thoughts. I needed to become an adult and be told how my mind works and how my emotions work before I could actually start using my thoughts on purpose. And wow. I don't even know where to begin when talking about this, because it's this snowball effect that has just affected everything. But where I am today is realizing that I forgot all of the things that I learned that once made me the happiest person I know. I went back to accepting my emotions as they just reacted and responded. And then my happiness sort of was left up to chance again. But I do have the recipe now, and I do know these things. So what I did, I made a list. I have started writing a list that tells me everything I knew and did mentally when I was the happiest person I knew. So I'm reminding myself of these lessons because I want to go back to that. Because what I realized when I started choosing my thoughts on purpose and noticing my thoughts, everything begins with noticing your thoughts, right? Because if you're like me, you have been going through most of your life not really noticing what you think about. You might have noticed your emotions, but not what actually led to them, right? And that is because our thoughts, they just appear in milliseconds because we have been training our minds for our entire lifetime to have these typical responses and reactions towards everything that happens to us. So if I've had an experience once in my life that the first time I thought about it made me feel bad because I thought about it in a negative way, my mind stores that. So then every similar situation I will later experience in my life, I don't have to sit and think, how will I react to this situation? My mind just uses what it has experienced before, and it will give me that same reaction. Unless I start noticing my thoughts and ask myself the question, is this thought giving me the feeling that I want about this topic? And I started doing that after learning this in my NLP class. And I realized so many of my thoughts were giving me the exact opposite of the emotions that I wanted. Of course, because I was overanalyzing, I was going through things over and over in my head. I was worrying about the future. I was thinking about what I didn't have that I wanted. And it's very liberating, and at the same time harsh to realize that whenever you felt unhappy in your life, you've actually been doing that to yourself. You chose to accept your autopilot response to whatever was going on in your life. And you just took that feeling, that emotion that came with it, and you didn't even realize that you had a choice in it. But it's liberating, because once you know that from this point everything can change. You can choose to notice how you think. That's how I started on this project of becoming the happiest person I knew. And it wasn't even my intention to become the happiest person I knew. It was just my intention to get to know my thoughts once I learned that they were the reason for my feelings. Of course I wanted to get to know them. Once I saw that I'm not feeling that good most of the time. So now I know that must mean my thoughts are not very helpful in giving me the emotions that I actually want in my life, which is happiness, which is to feel good. So if I'm going to do something about it, I need to first take some time to get to know my thoughts. What have I subconsciously and unconsciously been training my mind to give me all of these years? But the thing is, it's not always that easy to notice your thoughts, because they are there all of the time. So what I started doing once I realized that my thoughts and my emotions are connected, I realized that it's way easier to notice how I feel. If I just felt neutral, that didn't matter, that was okay. But if I had any strong emotions, especially strong negative emotions, I could feel that. It's almost impossible not to notice that. But I still had to do a little, okay, I am feeling this. Why am I feeling this? As in, what was I thinking that gave me this feeling? That was what I had never done before. Before I noticed that negative feeling and I was like, oh, I'm feeling bad. Darn it. Let's look at other things to feel bad about, because that was how my mind was programmed. That's how all of our minds are programmed. They just keep going in the same direction. So if I already had a bad emotion, my mind would just continue to think about things in a way that only gave me more bad emotions. But everything changed once I decided every time I notice that I'm not feeling good, I will stop and ask myself, how did my thoughts lead to this emotion? And I just had to go through, what have I been thinking about? So let's do an easy example. Say I thought about money, and I worried how I would get the money to pay for things, or how I could afford that vacation or the house I wanted. I stopped and I thought, why am I feeling bad right now? Oh, because I started worrying. I started looking at all of the reasons why I should be afraid that I'm not having enough money, or looking for the reasons that it will be hard for me to achieve those money. So then the next step was to remember that I could choose my thoughts about money. So what I would do, once I took the time to get to know my thoughts, I wanted to try to change them. I wanted to try to choose thoughts about that same topic that I knew could make me feel just a little better. And I also had learned from my NLP coaching that I couldn't jump from here to here in one leap. So just one tiny bit of relief, one tiny step up on the scale that felt just a little bit better would already help my mind towards continue in that direction, because that's how it works, right? So I would think, has there been situations in the past where I have worried about money, but I still got them, or I still could pay my bills? Yes. Well, do I have shelter? Yes. Do I have food and water? Yes. Do I have clothing? Yes. Am I living on the street? No. Oh, actually, even last week I bought something that I didn't even need. I just wanted it and I bought it because I could afford that. So that little change, it didn't give me more money, but it changed my thoughts and therefore my emotions about it. And then you might answer or ask, what's the point about that? But the whole point is, worrying about there not being enough will actually not give me more money. I used to think that. I used to think that if I have a problem, of course I need to think about it in order to solve it. But since my mind will just continue in the same pattern, if I thought about it from that perspective of worrying, that is not the right mind space to find a solution. But once I started thinking about all of the good things in my life that came from money, I felt lighter, and then I could let the problem be for a while, and things kind of just worked themselves out. And if they didn't, I could still choose my thoughts about them. Because here is a very important difference that I also learned that is very important for my happiness, is that realizing even if a situation in my life is not exactly how I want it to be, I don't have to feel bad about it. Because if me feeling bad about it will not improve or change the situation, isn't it enough that the situation is the way it is without me also adding onto it another layer of feeling horrible? And this is not at all about money, but I know that money is a very relatable example for most of us. But this is just the starting point of me returning to the happiest person I know, reminding myself of everything that's on my list step by step. And one of the first things to remind myself of is to remember that I have a choice, is to remember that my emotions are signals telling me whether or not I'm thinking about something in a way that makes me feel good or in a way that makes me feel bad. And as I already talked about in my very first video in this Returning to the Happiest Me playlist, the number one thing to remember is that happiness, the feeling happiness, is actually everything we want in our lives. We just misunderstand and think about all of the things that we expect to give us the feeling of happiness. But happiness is an emotion, and emotions comes from the way we think. So we can get that emotion here and now just by choosing to think on purpose before getting those things. And as a bonus effect, feeling good about it already will actually make it easier to also get those things in real life, because that is when our minds will go look for these possibilities, not when we're worried about it. So if you want to join me in this and find the happiest version of you, start by knowing these very simple things. The reason why you want everything in your life is because you want to get the emotion happiness and feeling good. You get there not by chance, because then you need a lot of luck if everything in your life is just going to line up and give you all of these external circumstances. You get there by choice. You get there by realizing that you can choose your thoughts about any topic. And if it's hard to choose better feeling thoughts about one topic, you can choose to think about something else entirely that makes you feel better for a while, and then go back to that. And you can do that by choosing to notice when you have strong emotions and ask yourself, what gave you those emotions? What thoughts were you having? It's also very fun to do it the opposite way. When you feel very good, ask yourself, what was I thinking about that made me feel this good? Because that's also letting you know how your mind works and what makes you feel good. And you can return to those kinds of feelings. I am feeling so much better just by reminding myself that I have a choice. I have a choice in what to use my thought energy on. I don't have to just accept these automatic responses to things because of the way I've been training my mind. And you can feel a bit of grief in the beginning when you realize that you have been training your mind to feel bad, or at best, training your mind to feel good by chance, right? But there's also relief in knowing that if you have trained your mind to think this way, you can also retrain it to think in a different way, in a way that lets your mind know that what you want is to feel good most of the time. And just by realizing and thinking about these lessons, you have taken the first step towards that. You have let your mind know that you want to experience the emotion happiness and to feel good. And good things will happen from there. Good things will happen from there. I didn't know it was possible to feel that happy as I did for such a long time, until I just forgot that I have a choice. But now I remember. Now I remember, and it feels so good to remember. We'll talk again soon.